Welcome to a special edition of Legal AF. The fight over congressional maps has only just begun. California and Prop 50, yes, the voters in California are going to redo their maps. But we have voters in Texas that try to do the same thing, except there's lawsuits that figured out that that's a version of what we call racial gerrymandering, which is as bad as it sounds. It means redrawing maps in order to benefit generally white people against black and brown people in how they divide up their congressional districts. We normally don't talk about maps that often. It's usually every 10 years to coincide with censuses. But when you have a president like Donald Trump, who blows the dog whistle and tells everybody in MAGA world and red world they got to redo their maps now so that he gets a midterm advantage, we're off and running, folks. We got a major case that's up at the United States Supreme Court. We're waiting on a decision in a case called Calais involving Louisiana and the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, which is going to have a domino effect potentially about all of these matters. In the meantime, there's hand-to-hand combat going on about the Texas maps, because in a 2-1 decision, led by a Trump judge in Texas, of all places, in the Fifth Circuit, they found that map that we were all worried about, it took away 5 Democratic seats, is unconstitutional, violates the Voting Rights Act, and is racial gerrymandering. Now it's gone to the United States Supreme Court. We're back there at its doorstep. It's a perfect time to bring in Marina Jenkins, who is the executive director of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. I'm just going to call it the NDRC. Marina, how are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for briefing our audience. You're on the front lines. You're what we call one of the first responders. You and your team and your affiliates are running into the burning building of our democracy, trying to save it. And you've got some interesting developments. We were all popping champagne corks a couple of days ago when in a 2-1 decision, Judge Jeffrey V. Brown, a Trump appointee, said, I know racial gerrymandering when I see it. I know how to read a letter from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice on Harmeet Dillon letterhead, and I'm going to throw these maps out. He got another judge to join him in that. And then we're off and running with an emergency appeal by the Texas governor to the Supreme Court. Catch everybody up about what your organization does, racial gerrymandering, and why our audience should be focused on this and concerned about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This is not the year that we intended to have, that we thought we were going to have in the world of redistricting, but here we are. The National Democratic Redistricting Committee and its affiliates are, the first ever comprehensive hub for, having a strategic approach to redistricting for Democrats and progressives. We, through our affiliates, do political work. We do electoral work, getting folks in the right seats to make these decisions, doing, grassroots advocacy and getting folks to testify, getting folks to get out there, and through our affiliate, the National Redistricting Foundation, bring lawsuits. And so after the 2021 cycle, the redistricting cycle, we had the 2020 census. And as everybody remembers, everything was kind of delayed because of the pandemic. And, once things got rolling in 21 and 22 and the maps started coming out, there's a lot of work to ensure that the maps were fair. And we actually got to a place where in 2022, the New York Times called the National Congressional Map the fairest map we've had as a country in a generation. And I will tell you, if you go back a generation, the maps weren't that fair. So I feel confident saying, we had the fairest national congressional map ever in modern redistricting history. And what that means is that the US House of Representatives will be the most responsive to the will of the American voter, meaning control of the House goes where most voters want it to go. And that's where we were this spring, before you get President Trump realizing, oh, shoot, I'm going to lose the midterms. We're going to lose control of the House in the midterms because his policies are so unpopular. And so we end up in this sort of mid-decade melee of gerrymandering across the country, starting in Texas.
Marina, stay right there, because when you and I talk in shorthand, I assume that a lot of my audience knows what gerrymandering is, and the racial part, I'm sure, sends up smoke signals or smoke out of their ears. Give our audience a primer on what gerrymandering is and what it looks like.
Right. So every 10 years, we have to redistrict. Based on the census, we get new numbers and new population numbers. And the principle most folks are familiar with, one person, one vote, means that all of the congressional districts are supposed to roughly have the same number of people. So they have to be redrawn. Okay, so we have to redistrict. We don't have to gerrymander. And some folks sort of, I think, get this a little bit mixed up. Gerrymandering is not a necessity, right? Gerrymandering means that when those districts are redrawn, they're drawn in such a way to build bias into the system, to either crack communities apart so that you take a community and put it into multiple districts so that they don't have enough power in any single district to elect their candidate of their choice. Or you pack a community, right? Say in urban centers, you put as many people, as many Democratic voters or as many Black voters into one district so that they can't have influence in other places. You limit the amount of influence they have. It's all about power.
Right. Right. And you got packing and cracking.
And then racial gerrymandering, right? It is just that concept. But when you look through the lens of, are we doing this on account of race? Are you, in a lot of states, it's state legislatures and the governor signs the map into law like normal legislation, like a normal law. And if they are doing that, but they're doing that and they're taking Black voters and, packing them into a small number of districts, or they're cracking them across multiple districts, we call that racial gerrymandering, right? That is discriminatory. It is, diluting the power of these voices, of these voters, and it is unconstitutional. It violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 15th Amendment.
And if you told AI, your ChatGPT, to take this map and draw equal districts of X, percent of the population of that state, you would not get this map. This is what we call gerrymander. It looks like a salamander. You would not get this twists and turns and to try to pick up this voting group and exclude that voting group, right? You'd get people would be like, oh, that looks pretty good. A whole bunch of squares. That sort of makes sense, but that's not what happened here. And then when you have, let's flip it to Texas, you got the Department, I almost can't get these words out, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division is headed by Harmeet Dillon, okay? Who, that was the consolation prize for not becoming the chair of the Republican National Committee. And whereas the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division was always at the forefront of protecting people's rights under the Voting Rights Act, for the first time in the entire history of the Voting Rights Act, in 50 years plus, we just had, in the Calais case, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division under Harmeet Dillon not defend the Voting Rights Act and say that it violated the Constitution.
Yeah. It's what's happening right now is wild. So, you're exactly right. The Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, is supposed to protect voters. It is supposed to protect Americans engaged in our civic life, right? That is the purpose of this section of the Department of Justice. And yet, under President Trump and under Harmeet Dillon, what is happening is the opposite. And so in Texas, you saw that. In Texas, you got a letter from the Department of Justice. They send a letter to Governor Abbott in Texas and say, hey, we would like you to go and redistrict your state. And here are a number of districts where Black and brown voters currently have the opportunity to elect their candidate of choice. And we don't like that. And we think you ought to go in and dismantle those districts. And then you have Donald Trump, on the South Lawn of the White House saying, I am entitled to 5 additional seats, right? So you have this partisan, pure, raw, just ridiculous partisan desire that Trump is saying, but he's doing it on the backs of Black and brown voters.
Yeah. Naked grab for power. And the Harmeet Dillon letter, which says, I think 4 of your districts are unconstitutional because they're coalition districts.
Right.
Like, what the F is she actually, legal AF, is she actually talking about? I mean, 10 years ago, maybe even less than that, Democrats were the ones that were in favor, and if they could get a bipartisan support, to get rid of political gerrymandering altogether. Right?
Yeah. And, I mean, there have been bills introduced in every Congress for the past 10 years, I think, to try to prohibit states from, among other things, partisan gerrymandering. Certainly, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act was, still is an important bill that needs to be pursued and needs to be passed at the federal level to prohibit mid-decade gerrymandering. And what we're seeing now, this idea that, in between censuses, in a given year, a state can just go in and redraw because it's politically advantageous for the party in power. Like, all of that we need to have a baseline of standard rules that apply to states across the country, because the sort of underlying fact is that redistricting is a patchwork system. Every state has their own system, and we don't have any standard guardrails at the national level to make it even and fair across the country. And that's what we've been sort of seeing play out in terms of, okay, Texas went and did this double gerrymander, and now California has to take measures to sort of respond, because I think the realization is we can't have a system where only one side plays by the rules and the other just goes for their maximalist partisan advantage.
Let's finish on Texas and the new filing there at the United States Supreme Court. I want to touch on the ruling we're waiting for and how you see that playing out as it cascades across all of these issues, the Calais case.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about what we worried about an adverse ruling in Calais in places like Indiana and other places, as Donald Trump tries to run up the score even before the game starts. It's like I told people in our audience, it's like Donald Trump before the midterms, it's like going to a high school gym for a basketball game, and there's already like 15 points on the board. You're like, what's that? And the referee's like, well, you're down 15 points before you even start. Like, the game started at 8. Like, I don't understand. Right? Well, that's where we are, folks.
Completely. And that is what the Republicans are trying to accomplish. They are trying to, give themselves a built-in advantage, a false advantage in the 2026 midterms. And in Texas, what we saw was, so you get this letter from the DOJ to Governor Abbott, and Texas lawmakers passed this, what we're calling a double gerrymander, because we'd already been challenging the 2021 map from Texas, because that was a map that wasn't giving Black and brown voters the access to the ballot that they are entitled to under the law. And so, suddenly, through the trial and through the legal efforts, you start seeing these Texas lawmakers backtrack. And you're seeing it even now in filings at the Supreme Court by the DOJ saying, no, that's not what we meant. We didn't mean that you should redistrict on account of race. But very clearly, the letter from the DOJ was about race. Governor Abbott says that letter is the reason that we need to come in special session in July and redistrict. And so it's so plain. And Judge Brown, who, by the way, is a Trump appointee, he opens the decision with a quote by Chief Justice Roberts. And so it's, a very clear shot across the bow here saying, listen, this is plain and simple racial gerrymandering. This is very, very clear what has happened. And so if you are going to make a different decision, like, you're going to have to figure out how to get out of your own words. So I thought that was very, very interesting.
I don't want to lose the point, because no one's making this in the press. And this is why I love having somebody like you on briefing our audience. It's the double gerrymandering point. See, everyone's like, because we don't know what we're talking about. Everyone's like, great, yes, we should go back to the 2021 maps. Those must have been better maps. But you just said it out loud. Even the map that Judge Brown 2-1 says you got to go back to the 2021 map, those maps suck too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's better than right? Like, it's a better position than where we are under the 2025 map, but it's not good. And, and I think that this is, it's really sort of terrifying to think about, like, this idea that these Republican lawmakers in states across the country might sort of look at what they do right after a census, see a couple elections go by and think, you know what, like, we could have done more. We should have done more. We think that, we can finagle these lines a little bit more to get more power for ourselves. That has nothing to do with whether or not the voters want that, or that's sort of the appropriate sort of representation for the folks in their state. But the sort of fear of this constant gerrymandering that we could be looking at now from here on out is that it just is a kind of like reassessment of how extreme their gerrymander was or could have been. And that's what we saw in Texas. They gerrymandered the map in 2021. They just did it even worse in 2025. And so, and I think, we're hearing, shades of that from DeSantis in Florida, right? Like
Yeah.
the Florida map was horrible. It is horrible. It is not representative of the people of Florida. And they want to make it even worse. And so that's the kind of, double gerrymander or gerrymander on top of a gerrymander that we talk about, which is to say, like, we're just trying to hold on to staying away from the edge of the cliff where it's just the worst case scenario for the voters of Texas and across the country.
And it's not just the 27 red states, it's even places like, we lost seats in New York because of some court rulings, some revisions, some map experts that came in, although those are being challenged as well by organizations like yours. By the way, before we move on to the Alito and the briefing and all of that that's just happened coming out of that ruling, I do want to acknowledge that a personal hero of mine and of Legal AF and of the Midas Touch Network, former Attorney General Eric Holder, is one of the founders or the founder of the NDRC, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, for which you're the executive director, right?
That's right. AG Holder is our chairman and founded the organization with the support of President Barack Obama and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, among others. And, it is a reflection of how important this issue is. President Obama refers to the 2011 redistricting cycle that happened when he was in office as a shellacking, right? That we didn't have our eye on the ball, and that Republicans sort of did this massive gerrymandering effort across the country that created incredible bias in the system and created districts where, the candidates are so extreme because they're just playing to the farthest, most extreme part of their base, because the primary election is the only one that matters, and there are sort of no competitive seats. And so, I think having lived through that in the Obama years, President Obama, decided that this would be his, post presidential political priority, say that 5 times fast, and tapped AG Holder. And we're just so lucky to have his leadership, not only because he is the lawyer, but, just an incredibly powerful voice on civil rights issues and voting issues. And so, being able to work under his leadership is something we are very grateful for.
My audience is now fantasizing about a panel of you, me, Eric Holder, and Barack Obama, right?
I mean, count me in. Count me in.
Let's do it. So Texas, does what we expected them to do. I had done a video about a hot take about it, and I was like, well, let me just do the short circuit here. Any moment now, there's going to be an emergency appeal coming up. There's Sam Alito, who sits over the Fifth Circuit on a shadow docket, turned over to the rest of the panel on an administrative stay. Did he grant the administrative stay on his own?
He did.
He didn't even turn it over. Nope. And the way that works is we're now in the world of, as my audience knows, we're in the shadow docket, the not writ of certiorari world, short circuit, short track, short record, 2 briefs, not 3, no oral argument. Yeah. That's the world that we're in for these major constitutional decisions, nothing more fundamental than voting. And talk about the brief that came in from on your side of the aisle that came in last night, and what's going to happen next and the timing of it.
Yeah. So, we anticipated certainly that folks would, that the state would appeal any favorable decision for us to the Supreme Court, and in our experience knew that this was going to happen very quickly. And looking back, the most comparable sort of experience that I've been pointing folks to is when in the beginning of 2022, our affiliate, the National Redistricting Foundation, was supporting an Alabama litigation that is still being litigated, by the way, but that has, since resulted in a new district for Black voters to have the opportunity to elect their candidate of choice in Alabama. Now 2 districts in Alabama that serve that purpose instead of just 1. And at the time, again, it was a unanimous decision from a 3-judge panel, and it was a thorough decision. It was, all of the things. And yet within 10 days of that decision, we get a stay from the Supreme Court saying, well, we've got to figure this out. It's too close to the election. This is I think it was like late January, early February of 2022. And so, right, the court's saying, oh, we're too close to the election. We have to sort of let this take its course. Fast forward a little over a year, and the Supreme Court affirms the decision of the unanimous trial court below. And so basically what has happened is that they just let an election cycle go by on a map that violates the law, that doesn't give voters equal access to the ballot. And they know that they're doing this, and it's just sort of buying time for their friends. And so I think, this is the concern in Texas, is that the same is going to happen. We are in November. So, now it's kind of like, okay, if you're really going to tell us it is too far, it is
11 months from now,
11 months, it's just absurd. Yeah. And, so it's this principle that's called Purcell. I think, even calling it a principle is like a little bit stretch. Right. And it's like, it's a practical, reasonable concept, which is like, when you get too close to an election, you don't want to start screwing with things because, there's a long timeline that takes election administrators at the county and local level to, have everything in order to make sure the elections run smoothly. Right. That's a legitimate concern. It is not a legitimate concern 11 months out from the general election.
No. So you got the briefing. There will be no oral argument. They may ask for maybe the en banc panel of the Supreme Court asked for some additional briefing on an issue. That happens sometimes. And then they're going to make their ruling about this particular Texas map. Of course, if it goes against our position, so to speak, here and your position, they'll say it's not substantive, folks. It's just procedural. Yeah. We're not saying that down the road, the substance of the appeal couldn't go the way of the challengers, but we're just saying for right now, we don't. Okay. And then we're going to have a fiery dissent by Ketanji Brown Jackson or by sort of we can write them now. I mean, we could just skip the thinger. Although we are far enough away, and with that finding and the record below, not that we know they ignore the record when they want to ignore the record. So let's switch gears for a second and kind of end the interview on your holding your breath, I assume, about the ruling in Calais.
Yeah, let me tie these two together, actually, because the interesting thing about Texas is when I, started doing redistricting litigation work, someone once told me when we were thinking about cases and what kind of case to bring, and do you bring a case under the Voting Rights Act, or do you bring a case under the 14th Amendment and racial gerrymandering? And someone said to me, well, the Supreme Court likes racial gerrymandering cases. And I was like, I always thought that was such a weird way to say it. But it's the same issue. And so it's super interesting. It will be interesting to see if they put a stay on the Texas decision, which is to say, like, this was very clear and blatant racial gerrymandering. This was redrawing maps on account of race, period. It's not more complicated than that. They want to say in Calais, you can't do that. Right. So it's actually an interesting moment. And I think, I don't want to read too much into, they issue the stay, as like it doesn't really mean too much about what they're going to do, in the end on the merits. But in this particular instance, it's very interesting because in Calais, so Calais is this Louisiana case where our affiliate, the National Redistricting Foundation, and LDF and NAACP Legal Defense Fund brought cases back in 2022 challenging the Louisiana map, similar to Alabama. They those cases were successful and achieved a new district in Louisiana where Black voters have an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice.
Even Louisiana said you got us.
Yes. No, and the state of Louisiana, like they just and they drew. So the court issued its decision. Louisiana had just watched Alabama go through this exact same thing. The state of Alabama, when the court said, okay, you need to redraw your map, the state of Alabama tried to sort of buck the court's decision and drew a map that wouldn't give Black voters additional opportunity. And so the court said, no, we're going to draw the map now because you, legislature, have not been able to accomplish this under our order. And so Louisiana sees this happen. And they say, okay, you know what? We're going to take the pen ourselves, and we're going to draw our own map so that we can provide that second opportunity district for Black voters in the way that is politically advantageous for us. Right.
And that's all it is. It's 2 out of 7 districts.
Right. But they wanted to be able to, right. And they wanted to be able to make that decision and not leave it to a court. And so they did that. Right. And so then immediately within days after the Governor Landry, Republican governor in Louisiana, signs this map into law, and we get a new lawsuit from so-called non-African American voters, bunch of white voters.
I was going to say whiteys, right?
It's like it's so it's a lot. And so, they file in the super conservative court in Shreveport, right? There had been 2 years of litigation ongoing in the Baton Rouge court, and but they find a new conservative court and a new conservative judge that's going to say, yeah, this new map is a racial gerrymander and has to be thrown out. So that's the case that now has gone up to the Supreme Court. This is the Calais case, and so in this case, the Supreme Court wanted, so the initial argument over that case was last March, and we expected a decision in June. We waited and waited and waited until the very last day of June, and the court just kicked the can. It was like, oh, we're not ready to make this decision. We have additional questions. Right. And so they only asked one additional question, and the additional question was very explicitly, does Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act violate the Constitution, the 14th Amendment?
But you said they only asked one question, but the one question is so potentially devastating. Does the Voting Rights Act, any part, violate the 14th or 15th Amendment, the post-Reconstruction amendments? Are you effing kidding me?
Yeah.
They were passed in the Great Society to implement the 14th and 15th Amendment, not to violate it.
It's enforcement legislation. It is the legislation to enforce that constitutional amendment.
Right.
So, that tells you, again, you don't necessarily need 5 votes to ask a question. You don't necessarily need 5 votes from the Supreme Court to, call for new argument. But very clearly after the oral argument in October, you have 6 justices, right? You have the 6 conservative justices who probably are primed to varying degrees to do some damage to the Voting Rights Act. I think you've got 3, Gorsuch, Thomas, and Alito, who just would want to say, I think Section 2 is unconstitutional and make it go away forever and ever. And then I think Barrett and Kavanaugh and Chief Justice Roberts are in this middle, but it's like what you said, where they like want to wrap themselves in respectability, and they want to like pretend that what they're going to do is very like modest. And so they're going to make some kind of change to the framework for Section 2 that, that they claim is like just a modification of what plaintiffs have to bring to trial. but they're not doing away with the law.
Roberts wants to kill Section 2. He's always wanted to kill Section 2.
Right. And so I think that like the impact and the end result is likely the same no matter what. Yeah. It's just like they try to cloak themselves in this air of like, we're not really, taking away the Voting Rights Act, even though that's exactly what they're going to do.
Which to our audience is another good reason to make sure you vote for a party that's aligned with your morals and values, because then they can pass the replacement or the amendment to the Voting Rights Act, which has been kicking around. It's just that every time it's around, the Democrats aren't in power. But it has to be, a Supreme Court decision will be on the ballot come the midterms about Congress, will it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's and we came close in 2022. We came very close. We had obviously enough votes in the House, and we had the White House, and yet we had Senators Sinema and Manchin who refused to carve out a democracy exception to the filibuster. So we did not get the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would have done that shoring up of the Voting Rights Act, which we need to do post Shelby County, which is the Supreme Court case from 2015 that gutted Section 5's preclearance requirement from the Voting Rights Act. And, we need to obviously shore up whatever damage is going to be done to Section 2. And then the Freedom to Vote Act, which had a bill called the Redistricting Reform Act within it, which now has been introduced on an independent basis, and that would prohibit partisan gerrymandering. And so those are the 2 things we need to address: both the racial components and the partisan components.
Our audience is going to sleep better at night knowing there is a Marina Jenkins who's running the NDRC, working with Eric Holder, Attorney General Eric Holder, and ultimately Barack Obama to make our maps reflect democracy, to reflect representative democracy, and for those that we talk to our audience a lot about cases, and you can't get too high or too low. You can't say, well, oh, we shouldn't. Why do we even bother bringing the lawsuit? Because the Supreme Court's just going to do X, Y, and Z. You just have to keep chopping the wood and stacking it up, and make federal judges do their job, and make appellate courts do their job, and then just fight hard, right, at the United States Supreme Court. And then you got to do rinse, repeat, and do it all over again tomorrow.
That's right.
That leads to success ultimately, does it not?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Just wake up every day and keep working.
That's it. And you look like you're very happy where you work.
I am grateful. It's Thanksgiving week. I am counting my blessings for having a job that allows me to put my passion into moving this country forward.
Yeah, and we love having you here. As things develop in your world and in these cases, would you like to come back? And we'd love to have you come back and brief our audience.
Please, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Marina Jenkins, National Democratic Redistricting Commission, founded by Attorney General Eric Holder. You see what they do with their affiliates. They're doing the lobby work, they're doing the political work, they're doing the voter education work, and with their affiliates, they're in the courtrooms, in the courthouses, and at the United States Supreme Court, and it matters. And if you didn't know what racial gerrymandering was before, and if you didn't ever think about what a congressional map was or how a congressional district was formed, you do now, and you have to act like your life or the life of our democracy depends on it, because it does. I'm Michael Popok. You're on Legal AF. Thanks for joining us. Take a moment, hit that subscribe button, and we'll all have a great holidays, because this channel is going to go over 1 million subscribers right before the holidays at the rate that we're going. And thank you for doing all that. Marina, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touches Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states, and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.